Will's up first. He says, so Bradley, do you use Vumber or CallFire as virtual numbers and then reroute those calls to your AnswerConnect service to provide support to your lead gen properties? Yes, Will, that's what I do. And just to be clear, I'm using CallRail right now. I mean, I've got like dozens and dozens of phone numbers with CallFire, but CallRail is a much, much better platform, guys. And so, like, you know, I talked about Vumber too. If you were just doing a handful of numbers, you know, or a couple of assets or something like that, then Vumber is a pretty cool, it's a great service actually. But if you're going to be doing at scale, which is what we've been preaching for the last few months, you know, a la the local lease pro method, then I would highly recommend that you go with CallRail as your virtual phone number provider. There's a ton of really, really good features in there. Not that you need them all, but I'm just saying there's a lot of really cool stuff that you can do. Like they call call workflows or something like that is what they're called, where you can set up automations and like all kinds of really cool stuff. And it's just like a drag and drop workflow or automation builder. So you know, there's just a ton of really cool things that you can do there. It's inexpensive. I just really, really like the platform. So, but yes, I'm rerouting. And by the way, I know I'd mentioned this at some point, but I thought CallRail had a live answering service too, like AnswerConnect is, but they don't. I researched that because just last week, or it might have been 2 weeks ago now, I had to set up a new account because one of my location clusters has started to generate calls consistently, and I had the phone, the virtual phone numbers just forwarded to the contractor directly. And he contacted me. He was like, I'm getting hammered with spam calls. He was getting some valid leads too, but he was also getting hammered by Home Advisor and, you know, a ton of marketing companies and all that shit because there's a whole bunch of new GMB assets, right? They were all funneling or all redirecting the phone to him. And guys, I've talked about this many times on Hump Day Hangouts, but I'm telling you, if you're doing lead generation, guys, one of the things that's going to separate you from potential competitors is if you set up, well, it depends on the industries you're dealing with, but I'm talking about for contractors or really for any industry for that matter, unless they, if you're redirecting the phone calls directly to your client or your service provider, unless they have a receptionist, somebody that's going to answer the phone, like that's their job to answer the phone, then I would recommend you don't send calls directly to them and instead set up a call service, a call center, an answering service. Does that make sense? And the reason why I'm saying that is because, guys, over the years, every time I've created lead gen assets and then forwarded the calls directly to the provider, in my case, contractors, I ended up losing first it would piss the contractor off because they would have to field all those spam calls, which were solicitations for marketing services mainly. So that would piss them off, number one, because it would be a shit ton of wasted effort on answering calls. Number two, a lot of those contractors will, you know, my service providers, which are contractors, are working contractors. In other words, they may be the business owners, but they also, you know, work out in the field with their tools, or they manage projects or whatever. And so a lot of the times they wouldn't be available to answer the phone. And so if they weren't to answer the phone, that's a lost lead, especially if I was charging on a pay per lead basis or on a revenue share model, right? Because calls that don't get answered are leads that are wasted. They're just, you know, they go out into oblivion, and that's money that I lost, okay? And then lastly, even if they did answer the phone, what happened, like even if the contractor answered the phone most of the time, what happens is because of the solicitation calls and the barrage of calls that come in, they would eventually stop answering the call and screen them because of that. And so what I ended up doing with tree service companies way back in 2012 was I got hooked up with AnswerConnect, AnswerConnect.com. I get no credit for that, guys. It's just a really good service for me to mention it. I got hooked up with them and set up a call center. And the call center answers 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. It's always available. So every time somebody calls one of my lead gen sites for tree services, it gets answered no matter what time of day or night it is. There's a live person answering the phone that asks, you know, a very short call script, asking what the caller's calling about, what, you know, and then some basic contact information, the property address, that kind of stuff. And then they forward that in, as soon as the call is done. Well, it depends on the arrangement I have with the particular contractor, but the vast majority of them, as soon as the call is done, the call gets the data, the lead data gets forwarded or sent to the contractor via email as well as text message. So it goes directly to their phone, and I get an email copy of it, right? So I get an email of the lead, and then I set up a Zapier for each client so that it will, because it goes to my email. So Zapier will I set up a filter that says if an email comes in from this address or with this subject line or whatever it is that I use to identify which email it is, then send it to a spreadsheet, right? A Google Sheet. And so what I do is I end up having, this is all automated. And then, once a month or once every 2 weeks or once a week, depending on what the frequency is that I go over leads with potential service providers, I've got a spreadsheet there that shows all of the leads, right? And it's real simple for me to just open up and look at it. So anyways, like I said, I thought CallRail had an answering service, but it does not. So AnswerConnect is still my go-to source. And I just set up another account, like I said, last week or maybe 2 weeks ago now, for one of our location clusters that's generating now. So what I'm saying, guys, is that's going to differentiate you from other lead gen providers is, first of all, exclusivity of leads, right? That's something I'll always pitch to a potential service provider or a prospect. I say, look, any lead that I generate is going to go 100% exclusively to you. That means I'm not selling it to 3 to 5 other contractors. That's what HomeAdvisor does, guys. HomeAdvisor sells leads to multiple contractors, so it's a race to the lowest price point. In other words, all the contractors will show up at a damn residence sometimes at the same time. I know because I've gotten a lot of tree service clients that way, guys, that they would literally, a tree company would be pulling into a driveway and another tree company would be pulling out. You know what I mean? Because HomeAdvisor sold that same lead to as many as 5 different contractors that I've been able to verify, right? And so all those contractors end up bidding for that job, and they lowered their price. So it's a race to see who can bid the lowest to get the job. And so that sucks. Nobody wants that. Contractors don't want to have to get in a bidding war with other contractors to get a job. So exclusivity of leads, that's huge, number one. Number two, if you offer a call center, then that means the only time that your service provider is going to get notification is when it's a valid qualified lead. How do you know it's qualified? Because it went through the screening process that the answering service provides, right? Don't get me wrong. Some of my contractors still get, like, for example, Yelp, absolutely relentless. Yelp will call over and over and over again, three times a week, different Yelp representatives to the same damn lead gen asset saying, oh, we're the new Yelp rep and we're just calling to, and it's always to sell advertising services. And so they'll still leave a message, and that message will get transmitted to the service provider, and I'll get a copy of it too. But I understand that that's going to happen from time to time. What I'm saying is, though, the notifications only get sent when the caller has completed the call with the answering service and filled out, answered the required amount of questions. Okay. So obviously, like, a Yelp call wouldn't be a billable call, but valid lead data would. And so that's huge because that prevents the contractor from having to answer the phone. It prevents spam calls from ever reaching them. And it also it ends up being to where they just get the lead information when it's convenient for them. They can call back. Obviously, I recommend they do it as soon as they get the information. But that way they can still manage their projects or, have their tools on, and they're still getting the lead. Whereas before, the lead would just go off into the ether, right, into oblivion, and we'd lose the lead. And when I implemented that, Will, with my tree service stuff, and this was way back when I was still kind of, had a fledgling business at the time. I was hesitant at the time to pay for the AnswerConnect service because I think when I started out, I started with like a $300 a month plan, which allows a certain amount of minutes and blah, blah, blah. And at the time when I was new to this, I mean, I was $300 a month was painful for me to give up, right? Like, I didn't want to commit to 300. There's not a contract. It's just month to month, but I didn't want to commit to $300 a month when I was barely making money at that time. You know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, I was making money, but still $300 a month was a kind of a big commitment for me at the time. But what was interesting is as soon as I implemented that, my revenue went up 30%. My net revenue went up 30%. That means even after subtracting the expense of the call center. And it was because now a lot of calls that were getting missed before were now being answered and the leads were they got followed up on by my contractors, which ended up, a percentage of them closed in the jobs. And so my revenue went minus I don't remember if it was really $300 a month or whatever, guys, but whatever the expense was at that time, I ended up having a 30% net increase in revenue on a monthly basis because of that. And so ever since then, that has been how I've developed my lead gen business. Is I always provide or I always set up call centers when I have assets that start producing consistently. Like initially, I might have the calls directly to a service provider, or even to just a voicemail while I'm optimizing and getting the asset to produce. But once it starts producing fairly consistently, then I'll set up a call center for that so that we have somebody actually answering the phone. And then that's when I'll pitch that service, to monetize it to potential service providers. Okay. That was a great question. And I appreciate you asking that, because I get that question a lot, even from, more experienced members in like our mastermind. And I'm telling you guys, I know a lot of people do lead gen and just forward them directly to the contractor. But trust me, especially if you have multiple locations that you're all forwarding to the same number, every one of those locations is another spam point, right? Another solicitation target, or magnet, I should say, another solicitation magnet. And so if you've got 6 or 8 or 10 locations in a metro area that you're forwarding all to one company, they're going to get barraged, like literally hammered with solicitation calls, guys. And you're going to piss them off. They're not going to want your services anymore. So again, I would recommend that you do that. Set up guys, it will make you can charge a premium for those leads because they're exclusive and because they're all pre-screened leads. The call center being the pre-screener. It was a great question, though, Will. Appreciate that question.